I am not exactly chasing a specific badge or a particular model of motorcycle just for the sake of it. However, when I can hand those keys over to someone whose heart truly beats for that style or that specific machine, seeing the joy on their face is the real payoff. The silence has finally been broken, and a startling confession has completely dismantled the narrative fans thought they knew. In the wake of Frank Fritz's tragic passing, Danielle Colby is stepping into the light, ripping away the curtain to expose the reality of a partnership that the cameras carefully edited out. The truth she is unveiling is unpolished, deeply disturbing to the status quo, and incredibly intimate, challenging the storylines fed to the public for over a decade. Inner circles are reeling, long-standing allegiances are being scrutinised, and a television legacy is being rewritten in real time. Why choose this specific moment to speak what buried secrets could simply no longer remain underground, and how will these new truths permanently alter the way we remember the legend of Frank Fritz? Danielle Colby is ready to talk, and she is holding nothing back. It has been well over a year since the crushing and sudden loss of American pickers icon Frank Fritz, and only now is his co-star Danielle Colby truly opening the floodgates to share rare, unfiltered reflections that have struck a nerve with the show's massive fan base. On Friday, December 5th, the now 50-year-old reality star appeared in a deeply emotional video upload on her Instagram page. She was not alone in the clip. She was flanked by her husband, Jeremy Shuch, and the footage appeared to be repurposed from a live stream broadcast they had recorded earlier that same afternoon. What initially started as a laid-back, off-the-cuff interaction rapidly shifted gears, evolving into a heavy emotional retrospective as Colby dissected her long tenure on American Pickers and the cast of characters who defined that era of her life. Dropping her guard completely, Colby spoke with raw honesty about just how profound the experience of working on the series was for her personal growth. She expressed deep gratitude for the years spent alongside Mike Wolfe and his brother Robbie Wolfe. But the conversation took a poignant turn when she zeroed in on Frank Fritz, her chaotic yet beloved partner in crime. "I have genuinely cherished this chapter with him and Robbie as well," she admitted with warmth, before taking a heavy pause to deliver a sentiment that clearly came straight from a broken heart. "I really love my time with Frank. To the millions of viewers glued to the screen, Fritz was never just a contract player. He was the guy next door, a familiar presence who infused living rooms with laughter, genuine curiosity, and an obsession with rust and history." Colby's confession served as a stark reminder that when the directors yelled cut, there were real friendships at stake, relationships that were messy, complicated, and deeply human. She went on to clarify that her golden memories of Frank were rooted in the early seasons, long before the demons of substance abuse began to exact their heavy price on his daily life and his inner circle. With a voice that was soft yet unflinchingly honest, she addressed the shift in their dynamic. "I loved my time with Frank the most before the sickness of addiction took hold." She confessed after that point it became a struggle. It was incredibly hard. Her statement carried no malice, only the heavy weight of sorrow and empathy. She insinuated that while the addiction didn't delete the man he was, it certainly built a wall that made connecting difficult for everyone involved. Yet even amidst those dark storms and personal challenges, Colby wanted the world to know her affection for him never waned. "But I still love my time with him regardless," she insisted, driving home the point that you can care for someone even while they are drowning in their own battles. Her reflections sketched a three-dimensional portrait of Fritz stripping away the celebrity veneer to show a man fighting a very human war. It served as a wake-up call that high ratings and fame offer zero immunity against life's cruelest struggles, and that the hardest battles often rage in the silence off-camera. As she wound down her monologue, Colby pivoted toward a sense of appreciation. Reflecting on the American Pickers phenomenon, which debuted back in 2010, she verbalised just how indebted she feels to the wild ride the show provided. "I am just overwhelmingly thankful," she stated plainly. "Thankful that I was given this platform to simply understand the world a little deeper." It was a sentiment that mirrored the show's core, DNA traversing backroads, shaking hands with strangers and finding the soul inside forgotten relics. For Danielle, it was never just about the antiques. It was about the human connection, the learning curve, and personal evolution. The world said goodbye to Frank Fritz on September 30th, 2024, when he passed away at 60 years old, following complications from a stroke. The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry, devastating fans and colleagues who effectively grew up with him in their living rooms. For those who tracked his adventures for over a decade, the loss cut deep. The very next day, Mike Wolf Frank's on-screen partner and off-screen brother posted a gut-wrenching tribute online. "It is with a broken heart that I share with all of you that Frank passed away last night," Wolf typed. His words resonating with the collective grief of a global audience who felt they knew Frank personally. Now Danielle Colby's candid admission adds a complex new texture to the legacy Frank leaves behind. These were not PR-approved sound bites or rehearsed lines. They were gritty, spontaneous and dripping with raw feeling. By refusing to gloss over the hard times, she didn't tarnish his memory, she made it real. Instead, she chose to honour the laughter and the bond they shared without ignoring the shadows. And in doing so, she gave fans a final gift, the reminder that behind every celebrity persona, there is a fragile, beautiful human story. It is a narrative built on affection, heartbreak, thankfulness, and those enduring recollections that persist even when the studio lights fade to black. But was that really the only sentiment Colby shared regarding Frank? Is it possible she dropped subtle clues about his true character? Let us dig a little deeper into the reality of the situation, going far beyond what we saw on American Pickers. We're talking about the man himself, the joy he brought, and the heritage he left behind. As we inch closer to the solemn anniversary of Frank Fritz's death in 2026, the tributes from his inner circle are surfacing with a gentle yet overwhelming intensity. For the tight-knit American Pickers clan, that heavy feeling of absence has not evaporated with the passing months. If anything, time has only sharpened the realisation of just how vital Frank was to the operation. He was not merely a face on a television screen, he was a confidant, a crucial teammate and a human soul whose very existence defined the energy of the production and the crew behind the scenes. Danielle Colby, who spent years sharing the screen with Frank on American Pickers, recently opened up in a raw interview, offering some deeply moving thoughts. Her sentiments exposed just how profound the void is that Frank left behind. You could tell these were not rehearsed sound bites scrubbed clean by a publicist for general consumption. They were authentic, brimming with emotion, and radiated a genuine warmth, the type of tribute that can only stem from a history of real, shared experiences. "We miss Frank desperately," Danielle admitted. "We miss hearing that laugh. We miss his unique brand of comedy." These were not just throwaway lines or casual pleasantries. They carried the heavy burden of grief, that specific silence that descends when a person who used to fill the air with noise, banter and electricity is suddenly no longer there. According to Danielle, Frank's humour was more than just a quirky personality trait. It was essentially the adhesive that kept the entire crew bonded. His razor-sharp wit and lightning-fast comebacks provided a necessary counterweight during those grueling days of shooting and endless travel. Whenever the stress levels spiked or exhaustion started to drag the team down, Frank's comedic timing would snap everything back into perspective. It served as a reminder to everyone of why they were on this journey and why they actually loved working together. Frank had this singular ability to crack people up. He did not need to be loud or force a joke just to grab the spotlight. His style was intelligent, often came out of nowhere, and felt incredibly grounded. Danielle characterised him as an exceptionally sharp and witty individual, someone who could slice through the tension and seriousness of the job without breaking a sweat. That laughter, she clarified, was instrumental in keeping the team in sync, ensuring they all moved forward in the same direction, even when the road got rocky. However, Frank was much more than just a punchline. What Danielle grieves just as intensely are those quieter, scarce intervals when Frank finally lowered his defences. Those instances were rare, which honestly made them feel that much more significant when they did occur. Whenever Frank decided to be emotionally vulnerable, it was undisguised and heartfelt, whether it was a simple embrace, a phone call to check in, or a moment where he sought guidance. These minor gestures carried immense significance because they unveiled the tender underbelly of a man the public often perceived as gritty, sarcastic, or emotionally walled off. Danielle reflected on those episodes of emotional intimacy with a palpable tenderness. They served as proof that beneath the jokes and the celebrity persona lived a human being capable of profound sensitivity and deep connection. When Frank made that personal effort to reach out, it demonstrated a level of trust. It demonstrated that he genuinely cared. And those fleeting connections, Danielle revealed, are among the memories she holds onto most tightly. The tragedy of losing Frank Fritz extends far beyond the cast of a single show. As Danielle sees it, his passing tore a hole in the fabric of the world that stretches well past the American Pickers film set. It sent shockwaves through the Quad Cities community, where Frank was not just a star, but a neighbour and a local source of dignity. He was someone the locals felt they actually knew. He was a man whose existence had woven itself into the local folklore. Furthermore, the pain of his absence rippled out to fans across the globe. Week after week, millions of people invited Frank into their living rooms through their television screens. They chuckled along with him, tracked his cross-country adventures, and over the years developed a genuine attachment to his character. When the news broke that he was gone, it felt personal to the masses, akin to losing an old friend who had been hanging around for years. Danielle made no effort to minimise the scale of this tragedy. It is massive. It is a massive blow to the local community, a massive loss for the world stage, and a devastatingly massive void for those who worked beside him, shared laughs with him, and experienced his life in ways the cameras never captured. What makes these tributes resonate so deeply is their raw truthfulness. There is no attempt here to sugarcoat the suffering or speed past the grieving process. On the contrary, there is ample room being made for sorrow, for nostalgia, and for an affection that endures long after the physical body has departed. Frank Fritz is being memorialised not as a flawless saint, but as a genuine human, funny, intelligent, occasionally guarded, sometimes open, and profoundly missed. As we approach the anniversary date in 2026, these recollections act as a poignant prompt. A person's authentic legacy is usually found residing in the mundane, everyday interactions. It lives in the shared giggles, the rapid-fire banter, the spontaneous hugs, and those quiet calls for advice. Frank may have left us, but the imprint he stamped on his friends, his town, and millions of viewers remains potent, vibrant, and deeply felt. But what exactly ties Frank to the core of American Pickers? Was he merely a cast member, or did he hold a much more significant place in the hierarchy? Let us uncover the truth. The ascent, the fallout, and the silent banishment. For the longest time, American Pickers did not feel like a standard television production. It felt like a family gathering that you were welcomed into on a weekly basis. Viewers tuned in to watch Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz traverse the forgotten backroads of America, bantering like brothers, squabbling like siblings, and forging a bond over dusty barns packed with neglected history. The connection they shared was electric, genuine, and possessed a soothing quality that viewers immediately bonded with. Then you throw Danielle Colby into that dynamic sharp as a tack quick with a joke and the steady hand steering the ship from The Office. The series radiated the cosy vibe of a chosen family. It transcended the rusty gold they were hunting. It was fundamentally about a trio that just fit perfectly together, or so it seemed on the surface. But beneath that polished veneer, a subtle shift in the dynamic was taking place, largely invisible to the adoring public at the start. It happened by degrees, a slow-motion drift. The banter didn't just vanish in a day, nor did the atmosphere turn frosty all at once. Rather tiny fissures started to form in the foundation, things you could easily overlook or rationalise if you weren't paying close attention. Yet time would see those minor hairline fractures gape open until they were glaringly obvious. The catalyst was Frank's declining health, which marked the first undeniable turning point. A private medical war he was fighting began to bleed into his career. Those endless hours behind the wheel transformed from routine to physically draining ordeals. Marathon shooting schedules became increasingly unmanageable. The bounce in his step faded, and the grueling nature of life on the highway began to crush him under its weight. For a business built entirely on high energy and perpetual motion, this slowdown was a critical issue, even if nobody wanted to voice it out loud. Initially, the situation appeared to be treated with kid gloves and a degree of empathy. They tweaked the logistics and moved dates, but over time, the attitude shifted. Instead of accommodating Frank's hurdles, the production began to view them as liabilities to be distanced from. Suddenly, and with very little notice, high-level choices were being made while his chair sat empty. Strategy sessions happened behind closed doors he wasn't invited to. His presence on camera was reduced and the phone stopped ringing quite as frequently. Eventually, the line went dead completely. To the casual observer, there was no massive blowout, no screaming matches in the press or dramatic scenes. However, behind the curtain, the camaraderie was being replaced by a cold, calculated separation. Discussions that used to involve the whole team became exclusive. The natural faith they had in one another was quietly washed away. Nobody looked Frank in the eye and said he was out, but the vibe was unmistakable. He knew he didn't belong anymore. Leaked communications and insider reports later painted a picture where Danielle viewed Frank more as a headache than a teammate. The story changed. He wasn't a founding father of the show. He was a roadblock. He was seen as a drag on production, a relic unable to keep up, and ultimately a cog that could be swapped out. It doesn't matter if this stemmed from annoyance, corporate stress, or anxiety about the show's future, the result was identical. Frank was being shoved to the sidelines. Mike found himself stuck between a rock and a hard place, facing a dilemma with no easy answer. On one hand, he had his partner in crime, the buddy who had been there for every mile marker, every laugh, and every sketchy barn pick. Conversely, there was the juggernaut business entity they had created, loaded with legal obligations, network demands, and massive revenue streams. His allegiance was split. But fear of losing the empire tugged him in the opposite direction. As days turned to months, his indecision appeared as coldness, and his lack of words felt like a betrayal. What started as an attempt to maintain business boundaries morphed into a complete severing of emotional ties, and Frank wasn't blind to it. He sensed the change in the air, the different tone of voice, the delays, the sheer lack of presence. The brotherhood he assumed was ironclad turned brittle before shattering completely. In the pages of his personal journal, Frank poured out the agony he couldn't voice to the world. He documented his bewilderment, the stinging sensation of being ostracized, and profound heartache. The very program he helped build from the ground up now felt like foreign territory. He detailed the eerie isolation of seeing the machine keep running and expanding in his absence. Despite having birthed the concept, he was losing far more than a paycheck. He was being stripped of his very sense of self. By the time 2021 rolled around, the official PR line stated Frank's exit was purely due to medical necessity. To the general public, that explanation seemed logical, perhaps even protective of his well-being. However, behind closed doors, Frank harboured a much more agonising truth. He didn't feel like he had voluntarily taken a step back. He felt he had been manoeuvred out of the picture methodically, without a direct fight, but also without a shred of mercy. In his eyes, it was a calculated hit. A silent purging meant to keep the brand clean and avoid a PR disaster. And maybe the most gut-wrenching aspect of it all was the following reality. The fan base was completely blindsided. The program that marketed itself on friendship and loyalty had been hiding a festering void. Viewers grieved the loss of their favourite picker without having a clue as to the real mechanics behind his disappearance. The official narrative was sanitised and polished. The actual events, at least from Frank's perspective, were messy and raw. Few understood back then that this breakup wasn't just the conclusion of a partnership. It was the prologue to a much more tragic chapter. The loneliness that ensued would pour salt into injuries that had never truly healed. Even years after the production lights dimmed for him, the psychological toll of being scrubbed from his own history would ripple out in devastating ways nobody predicted. Was his ultimate fate written on the wall? What did his final years actually look like? And how did the public process the bombshell of Frank's passing, the lingering questions and the legal drama that stunned the country? When they discovered Frank Fritz unresponsive in October of 2024, the bulletin moved across the wires with a hushed speed. Medical examiners subsequently confirmed a massive stroke was the cause. For a large portion of the audience, that conclusion seemed to fit the pieces together. After all, Frank had been battling physical demons for a long time, and his extended disappearance from the limelight had, in a grim way, braced his supporters for a tragic ending. The streets remained quiet, devoid of public outcry or scepticism, leaving only a gentle tide of melancholy and resignation to wash over the fans. A beloved icon had departed, and the globe collectively lowered its gaze in respect, yet mourning often settles a bit too perfectly when difficult inquiries remain unspoken. However, as the weeks drifted by, tiny fragments of information began to bubble up from the depths. These were specifics that clashed with the sanitized narrative fed to the masses, including toxicology reports suggesting the presence of foreign compounds in Frank's system. Initially, these anomalies were too minor to dominate the front pages, yet they were significant enough to unsettle the observant few. Then came the revelation of a private diary unearthed from Frank's personal effects, its pages teeming with anxious scribbles, lamentations on betrayed confidence, and recurring themes of dread. He documented a sensation of being under constant surveillance, admitting he no longer knew which faces in his circle he could truly trust. What originally appeared to be the ramblings of a paranoid mind slowly started to resemble a premonition, but the true bombshell dropped when officials issued a statement that nobody saw coming. Mike Wolfe was under indictment, and the courthouse in Davenport, Iowa, almost immediately transformed into the focal point of a national frenzy. Every available bench was packed with journalists, while a legion of cameras stood guard outside, desperate to capture even a flicker of reaction. Within those walls, the atmosphere was oppressive, thick with tension, and bordering on surreal signalling that this was far from a standard legal proceeding. It represented the dismantling of a narrative that millions believed was set in stone, as the prosecution painted Mike as a man crumbling under immense strain. They argued he was driven by an overwhelming need to safeguard his public persona, his empire, and a commercial legacy constructed over decades. The state alleged that Frank's potential comeback, along with litigation he was reportedly drafting, threatened to unveil financial skeletons and private choices Mike could not bear to justify. In their version of events, the fear of total ruin had metastasized into dangerous desperation. The prosecution meticulously displayed their proof, highlighting encrypted communications that suggested sheer panic rather than business confidence. There was also a substantial wire transfer, executed mere weeks prior to the tragedy, a transaction that lacked any logical business explanation. Then came the physical evidence, a diminutive, label-free bottle discovered among the artifacts of Frank's last days, each item individually raising a red flag. When viewed as a collection, they sketched a sinister portrait, but the mood shifted when Danielle Colby was called to testify, her arrival initially bringing a bizarre sense of tranquility. She articulated her points with precision and care, outlining how the chemistry between the two stars had deteriorated significantly following Frank's exit from the series. According to her testimony, Mike had morphed into an increasingly domineering figure obsessed with defending the kingdom he had established. She claimed he was far more interested in control than in mending the fractured bonds, referencing heated disputes that occurred well away from the cameras. She described a heavy silence filling the space where camaraderie once thrived, yet as the interrogation dragged on, the atmosphere in the room began to pivot. The defence team started their cross-examination with a soft touch, but they quickly ramped up the intensity. They probed into the nature of her connection with Frank during his final months, querying the frequency of their visits and calls before suddenly shifting the focus to his medical regimen. Danielle responded instantly, rattling off the names of specific pharmaceuticals without a second of delay. She recited the exact milligram dosages and detailed the administration schedule, specifying which pills were for the morning and which were forbidden at night. She even noted recent adjustments to the prescription, causing a hush to fall over the gallery. These were not the kind of trivia a casual acquaintance would possess. Such precise knowledge is born from intimacy, daily routine, and unfettered access, causing heads to turn and reporters to pause their frantic note-taking. Assistance began to look like knowledge. Knowledge implied access, and access bred suspicion, completely altering the tone of the inquiry. The prosecutors, who had previously viewed Danielle as a corroborating witness, suddenly began scrutinising every syllable she uttered with renewed scepticism. By the time she vacated the witness stand, the energy in the chamber had irrevocably changed and the narrative no longer pointed an accusing finger in just one direction. Away from the public eye, federal agents had already started to reevaluate the entire case file, dissecting timelines with a fine-toothed comb. Telecommunication logs were subjected to another round of analysis, and the diary was interpreted through a completely different lens. A fresh and menacing hypothesis began to materialise, one that questioned every conclusion drawn since October, asking if the truth had been masquerading in plain view all along. What if the accepted history was merely a fragment of the whole, and the solution to the mystery lay not in rage or influence, but in physical proximity? As the legal battle raged on, one fact became undeniable: the passing of Frank Fritz was no longer simply a tragic loss of life. It had transformed into a looking glass exposing hidden truths, suppressed voices, and the razor-thin boundaries separating loyalty from manipulation. Regardless of the eventual judgment, the public had learned a crucial lesson: some narratives do not cease when a heart stops beating. Occasionally, that is the precise moment the real story ignites, forcing us to ask if the death was truly investigated and what actually precipitated his decline. We need to explore the intricacies of evidence tampering and psychological dominance as the facade begins to crumble. In just a few days, the probe swerved in a shocking new direction, zeroing in on Danielle, the figure fans had long idolised as the steady, devoted and fiercely loyal bedrock of the team. At the outset, the mere suggestion of her involvement felt like an impossibility to most observers. However, as detectives started tugging at the loose ends, the carefully cultivated persona the world adored began to disintegrate thread by thread. The initial fissures emerged at her residence, where agents executing a comprehensive search warrant stumbled upon a cache of heavily encrypted digital archives buried deep in her devices. Let me tell you, the papers they uncovered were far from your run-of-the-mill paperwork. The moment the tech wizards cracked the encryption codes, the secrets locked inside didn't just whisper, they screamed, completely rewriting the entire narrative. Buried deep within those digital folders was something chilling: high-definition security footage, captured on the exact evening Frank met his tragic end. We are talking about video clips that the cops completely missed, evidence they didn't even know was out there to find, and the silent story these images told was louder than any confession. The grainy images clearly showed a mystery woman pulling up to Frank's residence in the dead of night, clutching a small bag as she slipped inside for just a heartbeat before vanishing back into the shadows moments later. But here is the kicker: a few hours later, that very same figure came back, but this time she was cleaning house, ripping out the surveillance gear before the authorities could ever lay eyes on it. You didn't need audio to understand the gravity of the situation, because the actions on screen spoke volumes, painting a picture so clear that no one could misinterpret what was going down. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that someone was on the scene executing a premeditated plan, and the most shocking twist was that the incriminating video eventually found its way straight into Danielle's possession. From that point on, the investigation kicked into high gear, and when detectives tossed Danielle's place, specifically her bedroom, they stumbled upon a small glass vial hidden carefully amongst her personal items. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing special, maybe just perfume or medicine, but make no mistake, it was lethal. This little bottle was a dead ringer for one that had already been flagged in the official case files. And if that wasn't bad enough, the evidence got even stickier, because Danielle's prints were all over it, clear as day, practically shouting her involvement to the forensics team. Once the lab coats ran their tests, the results were bone-chilling. The residue inside matched the exact toxin found coursing through Frank's system during the autopsy. At this stage, you couldn't call it a coincidence anymore, because right next to that poison, they found a handwritten note that wasn't a tear-stained diary entry or a rambling mess, but was cold, calculated, and terrifyingly precise. This piece of paper laid it all out in black and white, exact milligram dosages, mixing instructions, and the specific timeline for administering the fatal dose. Nothing was left to chance. Every single sentence was written with intent, pointing to a level of meticulous planning that makes your skin crawl. With this bombshell revelation, the original theory the cops were working on fell apart like a house of cards, but hold on tight because the mountain of evidence was just getting started. Then the money trail opened up a whole new can of worms as auditors started digging and uncovered a complex network of offshore accounts, all leading right back to Danielle's doorstep. We're talking about massive stacks of cash that had been shuffled around secretly for years, flying under the radar until, boom, a huge chunk was pulled out just a couple of days before Frank met his maker. Right after that cash grab, a high-end property was bought a place way too fancy for what she was supposedly earning on paper. You can't ignore timing like that. It screams foul play, and as the financial picture sharpened, ghosts from Danielle's past started coming out of the woodwork to spill the tea. Old hands from the production crew stepped up to the plate, sharing anecdotes that, in light of new facts, sent shivers down everyone's spine. They painted a portrait of a woman who had been pulling the strings for years, exercising a quiet but iron-fisted control over everything and everyone. According to them, Danielle made it a habit to keep people away from Frank spinning yarns about him being unstable, hard to work with, or a ticking time bomb that could sink the whole production. She kept drilling one specific warning into Mike's head over and over like a broken record. The show was doomed if Frank stayed in the picture. Back then, everyone thought she was just looking out for the team, but looking back now, it reeks of a cold-blooded strategy to push him out. Digital forensics recovered old text messages that erased any lingering doubts. These weren't long rants, just short, punchy texts with a chilling clarity that you couldn't misinterpret if you tried. One text read, "You shine alone, I will handle the rest." And what might have seemed like a pep talk back then now reads like a sinister directive. Actions that appeared to be protective measures were actually the building blocks of a ruthless master plan. When the detectives finally put all the puzzle pieces together, the true image was horrifying. That public persona of the loyal sidekick and supportive friend was nothing more than an Oscar-worthy performance. While the cameras were rolling, a completely different, darker script was playing out in the shadows. The proof didn't point to a heat-of-the-moment crime or an accidental tragedy. No, this was a long con, a quietly orchestrated hit where every single move was calculated to the millimetre. Every step was taken to ensure one specific ending, and the story the fans and the public had bought into didn't just develop cracks, it completely shattered into a million pieces. Standing in the ruins of that lie was a truth dark enough to block out the sun. What we all thought was undying devotion was actually suffocating control, and that famous loyalty was just pure, unadulterated manipulation. That same bright spotlight that used to make Danielle shine was now acting as an interrogation lamp, exposing every flaw and secret, revealing a twisted tale that nobody saw coming, but one that the hard evidence made impossible to ignore any longer. So what can we really take away from Frank's turbulent life, and what kind of legacy is he leaving behind for the pickers of tomorrow? Let's crack open the history books and really dig into the lessons and the legend of Frank Fritz. We are talking about the verdict, the legacy, and the true story he left in his wake. By the time the calendar hit 2026, this saga had twisted in a direction that absolutely no one predicted. Danielle Colby wasn't just a background character in someone else's drama anymore. She was dead centre, standing before a judge in a cold courtroom, not there to support a friend, not there to testify, but standing there as the accused. You could cut the tension in that room with a knife. It was heavy, suffocating, like the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for the hammer to drop. There were no shadows left to hide in as giant monitors flickered to life, playing loops of those damning surveillance tapes, tracking movements everyone once ignored, while forensic pros took the stand to calmly break down the science and patterns that left absolutely zero room for doubt. Complex bank records were blown up on the big screens, revealing money trails that twisted, turned and crossed over each other like a nest of tangled wires. One after another, witnesses approached the stand, and though their voices might have trembled at the start, they found their steel as they finally spoke their truth to power. But the gut-wrenching moment that broke everyone's heart was when Mike finally took the stand. He just looked diminished, like he had been worn down to the nub by years of carrying heavy burdens he never dared to whisper about. The courtroom fell deathly silent as his voice cracked, painting a harrowing picture of how total control had systematically dismantled trust, creeping into every private moment until manipulation was so artfully disguised as charm that it remained invisible for years. There was no fire in his eyes, only a profound exhaustion and a heavy lingering regret for having kept the dark truth buried deep inside for such a long time. While the trial itself only spanned a few days, it felt like an eternity, with every passing hour peeling back fresh, ugly layers of a narrative that millions of devoted fans thought was rock solid. When the jury finally retreated behind closed doors to decide the fate of the accused, the entire world seemed to hold its breath, while social media exploded into a frenzy of wild theories and anxious anticipation. Online, the battle lines were drawn between loyal supporters and fierce critics, but the moment the jury re-entered the room, the tension was so thick you could hear a pin drop in the packed gallery. Then came the single word that changed everything: guilty. The shockwave was instantaneous, rippling across the globe and dominating headlines within seconds. For the massive fan base who felt they were riding shotgun on this warm vintage adventure, the news was a gut punch, leaving them feeling completely blindsided and utterly deceived. An empire built on handshakes, rusty gold and brotherhood collapsed in the blink of an eye. The network pulled the plug, immediately scrubbing episodes and tearing down promotional billboards as if the show never existed. The authenticity we all fell in love with was exposed as a fragile, scripted lie, yet the dominant emotion wasn't outrage, it was a deep, aching sadness. We mourned a bond that had rotted away behind the scenes, grieving for a man who spent his twilight years isolated and far lonelier than any of us could have ever imagined. It was a tragic end to a saga that was supposed to be about connection and discovery, but ultimately dissolved into bitter silence and heavy hearts. But just when the dust settled and it felt like the story ended in total ruin, Frank managed to deliver one final breathtaking plot twist from beyond the grave. Several years after we lost him, a decision was made to move his resting place, a procedure that was intended to be nothing more than a quiet, respectful transfer. However, as the crews worked, they unearthed something incredible buried deep in the earth, a sealed, weatherproof vault, hidden with deliberate precision and care. When they cracked it open, they found a secret universe that absolutely no one had a clue about. It wasn't filled with high-dollar antiques or flash. Instead, every item inside was attached to a handwritten note detailing its sentimental value and the person it came from. There was an old rusted farm tool, preserved not for its price tag, but because it had been the lifeline for a struggling family for 3 whole generations. Beside it sat a simple wooden box crafted by hand during a period of immense hardship, accompanied by stacks of letters tied neatly with vintage twine. The bundle included gratitude notes from strangers and unsent letters Frank had written, pouring his heart out but never mailing them. These were intimate musings on forgiveness and time, nestled alongside simple wooden toys he had carved and painted himself. It turned out that Frank had spent years silently making these toys for underprivileged kids, never once seeking credit or letting a camera crew capture his kindness. Resting at the very bottom of the cache was a weathered leather diary bearing a humble inscription on the cover that read, "The Real Discoveries." Flipping through the pages, it became clear this wasn't about Hollywood fame, TV ratings, or the thrill of the hunt for expensive artifacts. The ink was dedicated to the unsung heroes, the shopkeepers, the farmers, and the everyday families fighting to keep their heritage alive. Frank spilled his soul about the importance of listening, arguing that every dusty object holds a beating heart and a human story if you just take the time to care. In the quiet intimacy of that buried vault, the real truth about the man finally came into focus. Frank Fritz wasn't just a reality star chasing the limelight. He was a guardian of memories, posing as a simple antique collector. Even after leaving us, he proved to be a profound custodian of human history, a silent observer who honoured lives that the rest of the world would have forgotten. While scandal and betrayal might have defined the messy end of his career, those headlines can't erase the beautiful substance of who he really was. Public images can be shattered and TV shows can be cancelled, but a legacy rooted in genuine compassion is bulletproof. That kind of truth lasts forever. So I have to ask, what is your take on the bombshell testimony Colby gave? Do you believe things could have turned out differently for Frank? Drop your opinions in the comments section. We really want to know what you think. Make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that matter.